This is part 6 of Unit 13. Again, we're talking about World War II. The topic primarily of this section is going to be on Homefront. What is life like in America during the war? And we're going to talk a little bit about the years leading up to the war and then the years before America really got involved. What's it like to live in the country? So we're going to start with this idea of America being neutral. This is similar to what it was in World War I. A lot of the same reasons, you know, as the clouds of war started to brew in Europe and tensions rose, Hitler is doing his land grabs, Japan is attacking in China, Italy is attacking Ethiopia and Africa. As these things are going on and things are heating up, Americans are screaming for us to remain neutral. It's not our problem, it's a European war, these kinds of things, okay? But there are some things that make neutrality a little difficult, but we'll get into some of that as we go. Something that you need to know is something called the Stinson Doctrine. And basically what this doctrine is passed by the United States, the idea that the United States is not going to recognize any territorial gains by these aggressive nations. So when Germany starts to take over Czechoslovakia, we don't recognize that. We still say, that's still Czechoslovakia, that's not Germany. When Italy goes into Ethiopia, and in particular when Japan goes into China and says this is now Japanese land, we say no, we don't believe that. We still think that that legitimately belongs to China or Ethiopia or whatever country is being taken over. And so we agree that we are not going to recognize these territorial land grabs, and that puts us on a collision course then with those aggressor nations, because ultimately they know that America is not going to come around to this line of thinking, and they're not going to support us taking over territories. Even though we are not willing to back that up with force yet at this point, we are still saying we think it is wrong, and we're not going to accept that. So that tells those other countries that even though we're not fighting them physically, that we are not on their side either. When this happens, though, what starts to happen is people get worried because they can see a lot of the same things repeating themselves, history repeating themselves back to World War I. And so Senator Nye, who is, by the way, from North Dakota, leads a committee to figure out why the United States got into World War I. Because a theory that's very popular at the time is that big business is what got us into the war, because when there's a war, factories and industries make a lot of money selling stuff to the government, and they're the ones that convince the government to go to war. And America is desperate to stay out of this war, just like many of the other countries. They remembered World War I and they don't want to go down that path again. And so Senator Nye from North Dakota again runs this committee and investigates why we got into World War I. And basically the conclusion that he comes to is not that industry got us into the war, but the fact that we were selling to both sides just kind of made it inevitable that we were going to anger someone enough for them to start being more aggressive towards us, and that would get our feathers ruffled, and eventually hostilities would break out. So he's basically saying big business didn't push us necessarily, but selling to both sides kind of puts us on a path that is going to inevitably lead to war. And the committee also finds out that many United States companies are selling things to the Nazis in particular. And so when people find this out, bells and whistles and warning signs start going off saying, okay, we're headed down the same path again. We've got to cut this out. We can't do what we did in World War I and sell to these people. And so they decide we've got to back off. And so they pass a series of laws designed to keep us out of war called the Neutrality Acts. These are several laws. And basically what they all say is America can't sell to any country that is at a war, that is in a war. So this basically is saying if a country is fighting someone else, we can't sell to either side. And that's the lesson that they learned from World War I, and that what they're trying to avoid. So basically, once war starts out between Germany and Britain and France and so forth, we're basically saying we can't sell to those people because that's what got us into war in World War I, and we're not going to do that again. We're not going to make the same mistake twice. Well, FDR is elected for a record third time in 1940. First president and the only president to be elected three times, because they changed the rules after that, so you can only be elected twice. But FDR starts to see the handwriting on the wall that we're not going to be able to stay out of this war, at least in his opinion. He's saying Germany and Japan and Italy are too aggressive. England at this time in 1940 is struggling to hang on and fight against the Germans. They're pretty much on their own, and things are not going well. And so he starts to kind of prepare the nation for war and join the Allied side, which is the side that is more democratic. And here are some things that illustrate that. One of the programs that he starts is the first time ever we've had a draft in peacetime. So even before Pearl Harbor's attacked and we're at war, he realizes that we need to get a stronger army and military, so he actually has a draft before we're in the war. So if we do get in the war, we're more prepared than we usually are. Okay, that's pretty important. Also significantly, he institutes something called the Lend-Lease program, or Lend-Lease Act. Now, I just said a few moments ago we had these neutrality acts that said we couldn't sell anything to nations that are at war, but notice the wording here. Lending or leasing is different than selling. So that's how he's getting around that law. We're not going to sell stuff to Great Britain, we're going to lend it to them, or we're going to lease it to them. So it's a little difference in wording or technicality. But Congress goes along with him, and so we start to aid the Allies, in particular Britain, and we get some things from that. We get some land and things like that for bases and so forth. But that's the Lend-Lease program. And again, you can see this is really not keeping us neutral, because we're aiding one of the countries that is at war, and we're not aiding the other side. And so you can see how this is putting us on a collision course with Germany and the other Axis powers. Once Pearl Harbor is attacked in December of 1941, and we've talked about that already, this isolationist idea, or idea of staying out of the war, is totally scrapped. Americans are angry. We've talked about this before. When Americans are killed, Americans want revenge, and so people overwhelmingly want to go to war, think war is what is needed, and we start to mobilize, which means get ready. We build up our army, we draft more people, we put all our resources into war. And this ultimately is what pulls us out of that depression then, is because when we start needing tanks and planes and guns, the factories then have things they can produce, and there are, unlimited quantities needed, and so there's tons and tons of jobs available. So that's really what pulls us out of the depression, is this need for war materials, which again ends with Pearl Harbor. And the industry is very important in the United States winning the war. In fact, a lot of people say American industry was the main reason we won the war. And I'm going to show you a video clip that kind of illustrates that. But basically, the gist is we can produce more goods, more tanks, more planes, ships, than the other guy can sink or shoot down or destroy. We can produce more and faster than any other country in the world, because we have more factories and more resources than anyone else. So during the war, we're able to overwhelm them just because we can have more of everything we need than the other countries. We're not going to run short. And part of that, of course, has to do with that we're not defending ourselves at the same time. We're not having to worry about defending our borders as much as Japan or Germany or Italy or Great Britain or Russia for that. In class, then, I'm going to show a clip about how American industry helps us win the war, and that's going to be the end here of part 6.